Good morning. It is Friday, April 17th, and I just ended the Zoom meeting and nobody showed up. So I'm assuming everybody did well, is doing well, and didn't need to talk face to face. Maybe your professor needs to talk face to face. I don't know. I miss my students every day. My professor friends, we keep emailing each other and saying, we miss our students. And so today I want to talk about the institution of the Catholic Church and what will become the Great Schism with the Eastern Church in 1054 and the fall of Constantinople. And so when we are looking at the Catholic Church, as I talked about in the last video, is that it created the unification to bring back Europe out of the Dark Ages, whatever we were calling them, and that it is the Christian kings who have figured this out. And so when we are looking at the Catholic Church, for those of you who are not Catholic, there is, and this also went for the Eastern Church up until the split in 1054. Sorry, so the hierarchy of the Catholic Church is that because of what is called the Petrine doctrine, or the doctrine based on St. Peter, that upon this rock I shall build my church. And for those of you who do not know your church history, Peter was the apostle closest to Jesus and also was crucified in Rome. And he did not feel worthy to be crucified the same way as Jesus, so he was crucified upside down. And so that's where the Petrine doctrine comes from. And so St. Peter is considered the spiritual rock of the church. And so any pope is the life, human embodiment of the spirit of St. Peter here on earth. And so this Petrine doctrine did not start in the early days of the church. It came about in the 5th century with Pope Leo, when he really was able to coalesce power as the Roman Empire fell. And so when we are looking at Pope Leo, we can see he will basically use the bishopric of Rome, and that is the official title of the Pope, is the Bishop of Rome. He will use the bishopric to turn it into a very real powerhouse. Now realize you have the Pope, which is the Bishop of Rome. Every major city has a bishop. So there'll be a bishop of Paris, and a bishop of Chartres, and a bishop of Jerusalem, and the bishop of... There's bishops, and so these are cathedral cities. Wherever there's a cathedral, there's a bishop or an archbishop. And so these cities are great powers of wealth. They bring a lot of money to the town. And these bishops, a lot of them are very wealthy in their own right. They're going to be the rich sons of noblemen eventually, who basically use the power of the church to build their own little fiefdoms. The saying in the Middle Ages was that if you have more than one son, the first one inherits, the second one soldiers, and the third one you give to God. So often these bishops are not necessarily the most religious people in the world. So you have the bishops who control the cities. You have the archbishops who control a bigger region. So you would have archbishops basically rule a region. So you might have 4 or 5 or 8 bishops under one archbishop. And remember, a bishop can also be the archbishop of his region. So he might be the bishop of Paris and still be the archbishop of France, or things like that. And so keep that in mind when you're thinking about that they are amassing a lot of power. There's one other group of hierarchy that is right below the Pope that lives in Rome, and that is the College of Cardinals. And so the College of Cardinals is who the Pope is picked from, and they are the ones who vote for the Pope. And so the College of Cardinals wear the red robes. Now realize you could be a cardinal, but also be the archbishop and be the bishop. This pluralism of very rich roles, even though these men are supposed to take vows of poverty, brings a lot of wealth to their family, a lot of prestige. If you take the next class in European history, we'll look at the Medicis, also the Borgias are another group that just use this power to just create little fiefdoms, kingdoms of their own. And so the whole idea of the bishopric and the cardinals is to create an administrative layer. Out of every, so you have pope, cardinals, archbishop, bishops. I wish I had a whiteboard so I could draw this on there for you, but you can Google it and see it really easy. But the bishops are your local. So we have like a bishop here in Oklahoma City. He's actually an archbishop also because he controls most of central and western Oklahoma. And under every bishop would be, and in every bishopric, are dioceses or parishes. So unlike Protestant churches, where you go to church when you're Catholic is not by whoever preacher you like or whatever is the coolest sounding music or things like that. Matter of fact, they didn't have music yet. It is where you live. So I live here in Norman, and we have 3 Catholic churches. We have St. Mark's, St. Joe's right down the street, and St. Thomas More. St. Thomas More serves over there by the university. St. Joe's is actually the parish I belong to, that I live in. But I really like St. Mark's better, and they're about equidistant from my house, so I go to St. Mark's. But Catholics do not compete for parishioners. You just go to your neighborhood church, and that's how it always is. And you become a member of that church, you are baptized in that church, and often you are married in that same church, and you are buried in the church cemetery. And so when you are thinking about how the church operates, it's a very logical system. And so you have local parishes or dioceses. If you live in Del City, I believe the church there is St. John's. If you live in Midwest City, it's St. Philip's. If you live out in Hara, it's St. Teresa's. Every area has their own Catholic church. And so the priest was your local, he was often local, or he might be sent from a local monastery or whatever. But being a priest was the one who ministered to the community. And remember, the Catholic Church also provided a lot of social networking in a time when we were in social isolation. But the Catholic Church provided later on hospitals, nursing homes, orphanages, foundling homes, and schools. They were the social safety net for society. Anybody who stops and is poor, the church had to offer them sanctuary for one night and feed them. You couldn't, in Catholicism, you cannot go to heaven without doing good works. So feeding the poor and taking care of them is part of your job. And so when you are looking at how the church is structured, it provides a social network upon which Western Europe will be built. The Eastern Church is just the same, except they have a patriarch instead of a pope. But as we see Europe, especially under Charlemagne, Charlemagne comes in the 700s. He's the grandson of Pepin, who saved Europe for Christianity. And he, sorry, Charlemagne spends much of his life crusading. Just he considered warfare a yearly activity. Springtime, let's go to war. But one of the things Charlemagne did is he recreated the Holy Roman Empire, and he will be crowned emperor on Christmas Day, 800 A.D., by Pope Stephen. And so when we look at Charlemagne, Charlemagne will go on a cathedral building mission, he will go on a church building mission, and he really ties kings and nobles to the church. We do not have countries yet. We do not have states yet. We're not even to nation states. And so you're talking about creating huge power bases in a region, like the Lombardy region or the Burgundy region of France, or the Burgundians is what they're called, or things like that. Realize we are talking about time when we're talking about the Vikings are running loose, and things are not quite settled yet. But what Charlemagne does is he gives us the Holy Roman Emperor, and gives us a emperor who is tied to the Catholic Church. This is not going to set well with the eastern half of the church, and especially with the spread of Islam and fighting Islam, we will see the two churches start to pull apart. And in 1054, over a lot of doctrinal issues, the Catholic Church was split in two, into the Orthodox Church with Byzantium as its head, the Patriarch of Byzantium in the east, and the Catholic Church in the west, with the Bishop of Rome being the head, or the Pope. And so this is called the Great Schism. It still goes on today. Actually, the two halves of the church are trying to reconcile a little bit to try to help with the rise of Islam spreading throughout Europe today. But that's a whole nother subject, and we're actually going to have a question on that. Greater discussion question. And so when we are looking at the Catholic Church, it provides the structure on which everything else is built. Also, another thing the Catholic Church had outside of this very strict hierarchy were monasteries and eventually nunneries. Monasteries are run by an abbot, nunneries by a mother superior. They do not answer to the local bishop. They only answer to the Pope. Monasteries are endowed by the Pope and supported by the local churches that it serves. So like we have a monastery here in Oklahoma. It's down in Shawnee. It's St. Gregory's. It's a Benedictine monastery. And so monasteries were a place where people could go away from worldly things to serve God. And realize monasteries have many different purposes. Some are for prayer only. There are still monasteries that they take vows of silence. There are monasteries that deal with the sick, the hospitaliers, or the hospitals. You have the Jesuits, who are warriors for Christ. The Jesuits aren't founded until much later, till the Reformation. You have the Benedictines. You have the Franciscans, who are founded by St. Francis. But the monasteries live isolated. They live behind walls. Anybody can become a monk. Often your family would donate some money, but anybody can show up at a monastery and go through the whole thing, the years, and become a brother. You're a brother if you're a monk. And you can be a brother and a local priest also. You can be one who serves both. But often monks wanted a non-worldly life. Nunneries are the female equivalent of monasteries. Nunneries were for women. Often they are for the excess daughters of the wealthy. Nunneries offered women a freedom they did not get anywhere else in society. Because they were not to marry, they become brides of Christ. They don't have children. They're not saddled with childbirth, which was the number one cause of death for women up until the 20th century. They also are allowed to engage in intellectual pursuits, spiritual pursuits and intellectual pursuits. They have a freedom there that most women in Europe did not have. Also, they would become the teachers and nurses of Europe. So this allows women to have a profession. And so for a lot of women, going into a nunnery didn't necessarily seem like the kind of negative connotation we have to it. You would take vows of poverty, and your head would be shaved, you would take new names, and you would disappear into your nunnery. And so this is the social structure of Europe at the time. and it provides a safety net. It is also out of this social structure that we will see the Crusades, but we will also see the scholastic movement eventually come, because one of the things the Catholic Church did was educate its people. The Catholic Church believed that all archbishops, bishops, cardinals, monks, and priests and nuns should be educated so they could speak the word of God wisely. And so they established what will be called seminaries. And so every priest knew how to read and write. Nuns knew how to read and write. Monks knew how to read and write. And so they will become the literati of society and become the intellectual beings of society. I'm not going to say they were greatly educated, we're not there yet, but the seminary system will give rise eventually to the university system. So that is this lecture for today. I will be including notes on this on your next quiz, so be sure you watch it. All right, have a nice weekend. Be careful, be good, be safe, be healthy. Bye.